Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan and it's not Spawn year. It's day 53 of my comic review video day calendar, and today I thought I would tackle another Amalgam issue because there are still a few that I've never talked about on camera, and these are all standalone one and done things, and I know we have a few Amalgam fans in our audience, so I thought I would throw them at least one more bone this year. I already did Dark Claw Adventures, which was a Wolverine Batman mashup that was a parody of Batman the Animated Series and the comics that series is based on, of course. This is an idea that I always thought was really funny, and I never took a look at this issue, so I always think of this as one of the more amusing characters in Amalgam, but I've never actually experienced it. And having read this now, I don't know what I'm going to say about this. These are two characters mashed up that I never was a big fan of and didn't know a whole lot about, and this reads pretty authentic to me to both of them. This feels like one of the better mashups I've looked at, but certainly not one of my favorite comics to have to read through. This is Lobo the Duck, #1, and there aren't any others. This is a one-shot, but these all have numbers, and they're mostly, if not all, #1s. This is from 1997. This is the second batch of Amalgam one-shots after DC versus Marvel, and the cover says, "Trapped in a world he never fragged." So we're even blending together the catchphrases. Lobo uses that word all the time. He frags things. He blows them up. We can't say, swear words, so we have to make up kind of alien, spacey swear words. But it's funny because frag is also used, I almost said later on, at actually this exact time period, but frag goes back, at least a couple of decades before this with Lobo, but is used in the Quake games. When you kill people, they're frags. You have 3 frags left. So whenever I was playing the Quake games when I was a kid, I always thought it was kind of odd that they shared that terminology. But anyway, once again, 1997, the second batch of these. There's an ad in this book that says we're going to do this one more time. There's 9 more Amalgam books, summer of 97. That's all you get. And I didn't realize that they had planned not to make any more after that, and that this really was the intended last hurrah. And this is one of those Amalgam issues that kind of pretends like it's right in the middle of a big arc. And so you only get, it's funny because I've reviewed a lot of things this year where you're only getting, one 22-page piece of a much larger story, a much larger pie. And sometimes I'll review the first issue of an arc, sometimes I'll review the last issue. Very rarely have I gone to, if at all, to like the second issue of something, or the fourth or the third issue of something, if it's like a 4-issue story arc. But this is intentionally written as if that's where you are. So this is pretending like it ended on a big cliffhanger where Manhattan has been destroyed. It stands in ruin. And there's a big mystery as to who exactly is behind all of this. And when we get to the end and we find out who it is, it's kind of a letdown to me because I don't. If it is an amalgamation, it is. Now I'm looking at this list. It's of 2 things I've never heard of before, and there's a lot of that, by the way, with this, where it's just a lot of really obscure mashups, and I am not a big enough fan of this side of either DC or Marvel to fully appreciate what I'm looking at here. So if you're a big fan of the more raunchy, kind of rough and tumble parody or comedy comics of either DC or Marvel, you're going to appreciate this a lot more than me, and you might even see some panels here and chuckle because you'll get some of the mashups, and this might be more of your sense of humor than it was mine. Weirdly, I found the fourth wall breaking stuff to be the funniest stuff in this, even though that's gimmicky and we really overdo that now these days, was much more of a novelty back at this time period, and is, again, real faithful to at least Howard the Duck, which did those kinds of fourth wall breaks, I think. And Lobo wasn't really about that so much, even though that is kind of a dark comedy thing much of the time. But anyway, the thing I always liked about the mashup of Lobo and Howard the Duck is just we didn't actually blend two names together. It's just we took the duck part of Howard and we just made him Lobo. And in this, and this is kind of the biggest compliment I'll give it, I think, because again, I didn't love reading this. It just wasn't really to my taste. It wasn't. And obviously, I can appreciate a thing that's accomplishing what it's after, even if I don't really appreciate it, even if it's not my bag. I kind of wonder people for whom this is aimed more at, how much of this they would laugh at versus how much of it I did, because I just don't know. And of course, that's a real kind of subjective sort of thing, but but these two things, weirdly, as silly as this sounds, is ridiculous. And Howard the Duck is a really ridiculous character in the first place. There's an inherent absurdity to this, but like as crazy as it is to put Lobo and Howard the Duck together, they have a strange amount in common. Like they're both these kind of undesirable, reprehensible to some degree sorts of characters. They're both kind of womanizers. They're both real crass. They're not careful about what they say. They kind of do whatever they feel like doing. They're both kind of spacefaring characters. They exist in the kind of cosmic, more space realm in their respective universes. They're both loners. They both have girlfriends very often that give them crap for being chauvinist. They do have a weird amount in common, and it's, I think, one of the better designs, actually, with Amalgam. So this concept, I think, I like a lot more than the execution of it. And boy, there are just some bizarre mashups here with things that, like I said, I very often don't know quite enough about. Like we've got Ambush Bug here, who's blended with Marvel's Lunatic, who I've only ever seen covers of. I've never actually read any of that, but I think that's another kind of impish, offbeat, wild, bizarre kind of character. So we're throwing in a lot of characters from books that are just farcical comedies, and I'm putting that all in a blender. And I think the idea is supposed to be the universe is like the world is at stake. We've got much larger stakes than we have in some of the other one-shots that I've read with Amalgam, but the only person that can save us is Lobo the Duck. Oh no. And he's just running around like being massaged by beautiful women, which is, weird and messed up, obviously, because there's kind of the, bestiality component to it, and there's a lot of kind of intentionally icky stuff here, and that's what both Howard the Duck and Lobo were all about. It was really pushing kind of the raunchy envelope, doing a lot of really risque stuff that in especially the 70s, when some of this starts, would be considered even a lot more taboo than it would by the 90s and today. And some of the sexual stuff it's doing is in a lot of circles more taboo now than it was even in the 90s. But this is very much not a thing for kids, and I was kind of surprised by just how far the violence goes and the sexual content. You've got the amalgamation of, I'm kind of laughing at some of these character names, and I'll get into this. I've got a list here of the things that this book in particular introduces, but you've got Beverly. Beverly is the girlfriend of Howard the Duck, or at least his female sidekick. I haven't read a lot of Howard the Duck. I assume that she's like a honest to God love interest in that. I'm out of my depth here, by the way. This is material that I'm not, again, super familiar with. And then Beverly Switzler, who is, I guess, a love interest for Lobo the Duck. I'm not familiar with her, but She gets upset with Howard for messing around with other women and says that she wanted to have Howard's ducklings, which is, again, kind of messed up. And then she tries to forgive him later because he's going off on this bounty hunter mission. Like, he's got to save the world, but he's not doing it because he actually cares about anybody. He's just being paid, which is definitely the Lobo side, and I think Howard the Duck is also a character that's kind of real narcissistic and out for himself and doesn't really care much about what happens to anybody else. But I haven't read enough of that character to really know for sure. But toward the end of this, she ends up trying to forgive him, and then decides that she really doesn't care about him anymore because he just starts sleeping with other women again, which I guess is supposed to be funny because he's just a really terrible person, and also he's a duck. I don't know. The funniest bit in this to me, like I said, I actually liked some of the fourth wall breaking stuff, and it's really not from Lobo the Duck himself. Well, not too much. He kind of knows that he's in the Amalgam universe, but only for a couple of panels. Let me go back to that for a second. There's a running gag, and then I'll get to my favorite bit. There's a running gag here that's fun, where his dog, the Impossible Dog, D-A-W-G, amalgamation of DC's Dog, who is one of Lobo's supporting characters in his book, and Marvel's Impossible Man. What a weird thing to blend together. Impossible Man, another of these kind of impish, out there kind of, fifth or sixth dimensional characters or whatever. He is breaking not just the laws of physics, but the laws of continuity, says Lobo the Duck. So the one place where it seems like he understands not just that he's in a comic book, but that it's this blend of DC and Marvel, because the gimmick is the dog keeps turning into characters that don't even exist in this universe. So in one panel, he's Superman. In another panel, he's Wonder Woman. I think the first time we see him turn into something, maybe it is Superman, and then later there's some other. I've just been mentioning DC characters. There's some Marvel characters. On a second flip through this book, I noticed even the Wonder Woman one is there. Some characters that I didn't pick up on before. I'm not seeing them now. Who else does he turn into? Oh, I think at one point he turns into Galactus. So that whole bit is pretty funny. But then there's this part where we're introducing a villain, and this seemed like almost a Tick joke to me. It's more fourth wall breaky than that, but we're making fun of kind of NPC characters, people who are introduced that just work at a warehouse or something and are only there to get killed so that you can see the ruthlessness or the might of a villain. And this guy comes right out to the audience, to the reader, just 9 pages in, when you're not expecting this level of fourth wall breaking. And he has this speech, and I'll just read it to you because it's funny. And he says, you readers out there don't realize how lucky you are. You have the right to pursue liberty and happiness, to live in 3-dimensional solidity, and to expect simple day-to-day continuity. But take me and Ron here. And Ron says, hi. We work in the labs, but we're no scientists, so we don't get any special character treatment. We're just working-class stiffs created on a whim. Patsies who will be rubbed out after a few brief panels of life just to emphasize how bad the bad guys are. I think that's funny. And then the bad guys come in and he says, what did I tell you? So the guy that's talking to us in that speech gets a gun pulled on him, and he says, no, please, I might have a wife and kids. I think that whole thing is really funny. So he's almost like a self-aware hologram in Star Trek or something. And then the other guy goes, no, I know you're going to kill me anyway, so I'm not going to tell you what you want to know. And so they kidnap him, and I don't think we ever see him again. I think that whole thing is really done just as a gag. So like I said, there's this mystery where Lobo is ostensibly trying to figure out who is powerful enough in systematically taking out city after city, destroying the world. Again, Manhattan is gone at the beginning of this. Meanwhile, all Lobo really wants to do is drink and get with scantily clad, beautiful women. Real quick, I was surprised again by just how far the sexual content goes. There is a panel where the second time around that he's kind of sleeping around on Beverly, there's the women that he's with. One of them is like missing a bra, and you see it on the other side of the panel. And then in a couple panels later, she is like got it half on, and of course there's no actual nudity, but it was kind of crazy to see this mainstream DC Marvel comic go as far as it does with that. Of course, this does not have the seal of approval on it, which was still around back then. We don't have the seal anymore these days. But when I was growing up, you still had that the Comics Code Authority seal, but there's not any kind of warning on the book that it's not for kids. And I don't know how many, besides some violence, of course, and of course in this country, some folks in other countries and people here too find this odd, but in this country, it's even today, to a lot of people, a lot worse for your kids to see any amount of nudity or sexual content, or people just kind of sleeping around each other, being promiscuous, than it is to see somebody's head being blown off. And I grew up in that culture, certainly, where you might have a pretty violent, bloody comic that parents wouldn't bat an eye at. But if this doesn't have some kind of, adults only warning, people would be upset. And so it's a little bit surprising not to see that with this, I guess. But anyway, so we're told, like, Dr. Strange Fate has been killed at the beginning of this. I don't know if this is actually supposed to be in continuity, really, with any of the rest of Amalgam, or if this is kind of off in its own world in a weird way. Like, we're seeing characters that we've seen before, but all the heroes have been killed. So what brings them all back from this? I guess this is just a big kind of Infinity Gauntlet level event, or it's like an issue out of one of those, even though it's called Lobo the Doc, where somehow all of this will work out at the end, and none of that will matter to any of the other books, I assume, is the idea. One gag I like in this, too, is you get a lot of footnotes, and we're making up a bunch of different Lobo the Duck titles. So the idea that this guy is popular enough to have a ton of different titles is really funny to me, because Lobo and Howard the Duck have always struggled to maintain books for any amount of time. And we keep calling back to giant-sized Man-Thing, which I don't know why. I think that's really funny. That's my other favorite gag, is I think 3 or 4 times there's different numbers. It's like, check out giant-sized Man-Thing number 6, and later it's number 3, and there's like all these issues of giant-sized Man-Thing. I think it's really funny, because traditionally the giant-sized thing, it's a single issue. It's just giant-sized whatever. There wouldn't be maybe sometimes they had numbers, but I always think of that as, like, giant size X-Men. You just have the one big book. So anyway, I think that's amusing. But apparently this villain is, there's the dog. He's Wolverine at the top of this page. But apparently the villain is, this mystery villain is powerful enough that that he or she is able to use characters like Thanoside as pawns in their game. And then by the end of this, we find out that the villain is, again, a mashup of a couple of characters that I don't know, which is partly why I wasn't, super enamored with this. But it's Gold Kidney Lady, and this also seemed like almost a Ben Edlund joke, but not one I found especially funny, but that she thinks that everything that's bad about humanity starts with problems with kidneys. It's like, I guess that's her motivation. Okay. And at the beginning of the book, Lobo heard someone who's dying say Kid Lee. So he keeps looking for somebody named that. And he finally realizes that he misheard that guy and it's Kid Nee. Okay. He has a really cool spaceship that's a lot like Lobo's, like a one-man spacecraft, but it's got a big duck bill in the front. There's a little bit of kind of Darkwing Duck to the look of Lobo if he was, a lot more hard-edged and rough and tumble. So he finally finds this villain and goes to try to take her out, but she has this big, crazy, impossible to pronounce weapon of mass destruction, of like global destruction, and it's starting to go off at the end of this, and it ends in a big cliffhanger. And the next issue, if there was one, would be called Don't Tell Mom the Bounty Hunter's Dead, which is kind of amusing. But yeah, this was not the best read for me. I thought this was a little bit of, more than a mixed bag, but I think a lot of it is just kind of taste stuff on my end. Some people really go in for this kind of audacious, raunchiest humanly possible, just doing it because you can get away with it kind of thing. And I guess what I appreciated about it is it does feel, again, pretty authentic to that stuff, and it's nice that they're able to get away with it, I guess, if they want to. But I was going to mention a couple of others of these amalgams here. We had, like I said, Impossible Dog. There's some characters that are just mentioned that have died already, and one of them is Vicky Valkyrie. Hilarious that we just put that together because it's alliterative, right? So it's Vicky Vale and Valkyrie. You never think to put those characters together. Dr. Bongface, I showed you a panel with him earlier. Scarface and Dr. Bong. Dr. Bong is a character that I am not familiar with at all. Marvel's Dr. Bong. Let me click on him real quick. Oh, yeah, he really does have just like this big bell face. Oh, he's one of the arch enemies of Howard the Duck. Okay. So, I mean, it's nice that they're going to these kind of, to me, obscure things, but wouldn't be if you were a fan of that character, I suppose. But my absolute favorite is Hawk, which is an amalgamation of Hawkman and Darkhawk. And I think, did we review an issue of Darkhawk earlier in the year? Or am I no, I'm thinking of another kind of obscure, short-lived 90s Marvel thing that we did, I think. But I think I have an issue or two of Darkhawk somewhere as well. I don't think we did that. But yeah, I guess by the end of this, the real big bad is the God Thing, which is DC's God, and Marvel's the Chair Thing. So there's really bizarre characters that we're mixing together. Surprisingly good idea that kind of works. And I actually like the art better in this than I think the execution of the whole story. But like I said, I'd love to know from people that like Lobo and or Howard the Duck if they read this and the humor feels on and if they're actually laughing at things, because it feels correct to me with that stuff and makes me think, well, maybe this just isn't for me in the first place. So like I wouldn't find a lot of the humor in those funny either. I didn't give credit to the beginning of this. This is written by Al Grant, of all people, with art by Val Zemeckis, which is a penciler that I am not familiar with, but I like the work there quite a bit, actually. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, guys. This is just one that I've meant to read for a million years, and I finally have done that. So there you go. And I'm going to do another one for you tomorrow, as always. I don't know what yet, but join me to find out, won't you? And I'll see you again real soon. I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.